Good evening. I would like to welcome us all to this evening's program. I'm Professor Obinya J, Assistant Honorary Secretary, Sciences Section of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences. President of the Academy, past presidents of the Academy, vice presidents of the Academy, fellows of the Academy, distinguished guests, students, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of fellows of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, Ghana's premier learned society, I warmly welcome all of us to this evening's annual lecture in the sciences on the topic food and public health. The Academy instituted the annual lecture in the sciences and humanities in 1993 with a view to creating a platform where fellows could take turns in addressing topical issues in the humanities and sciences that confront our nation and, of course, the global community. In the brochure, you will find listed annual lectures delivered since the year 2003 for your information. I'm also pleased to announce that this evening's program is streaming live via Zoom on Facebook as well as on the Academy's YouTube page. Sponsorship for this evening's program has been graciously made possible by the speaker, Professor Amos La, as well as other individuals and organizations, which I will take the opportunity to acknowledge here. Individuals to be acknowledged in no particular order are Honorable Dr. Sebastian Sandari, Member of Parliament for Dafiama Busie Isa constituency, the Upper West region of Ghana. Professor Kwesi Tope, the Dean, the School of Public Health, University of Ghana, Legon. Professor Analate, University of Ghana, Legon. Professor Barry Popkin, the Galen School of Public Health, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, the USA. We will also take the opportunity to acknowledge representatives of many institutions and agencies, including the Ministry of Health, Food and Drugs Authority, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, National Development Planning Commission, World Health Organization, United Nations Children's Fund, Coalition of Actors for Public Health Advocacy, School of Public Health, University of Ghana, Ghana Public Health Association, the Ghana Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the Ghana Non-Communicable Diseases Alliance. At this juncture, it is time to introduce the chairman, indeed the chairperson for this evening's event. The chairperson for this event is the vice president of the Sciences Section and a member of Council of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, Emerita Professor Isabella Achimba Kwachi. Professor Kwachi is a professor of immunology and parasitology at the University of Ghana. She is also a fellow of the African Academy of Sciences. She is the first emerita professor in the sciences at the University of Ghana. Among her many accomplishments, she established the immunology unit at the Noguchi Memorial Institute for Medical Research. She was the first female director of the University of Ghana School of Public Health and the foundation dean of the School of Public Health. This makes her the first female dean in the College of Health Sciences of the University of Ghana. She is a former UNESCO chair for women in science and technology in the West Africa region, and she won the 2014 African Union Kwame Nkrumah Award for Women in Science. She is the 2019 laureate for the Clara Softmaid-Ludlow Award by the American Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene. And Women's World Day recognized her in 2021 as one of the 7 women in science who have changed our world for the better. I think our chairperson deserves a round of applause at this stage. So, distinguished audience, your chairperson.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Assistant Honorary Secretary, Professor George Obinyeji, for the kind words. President of the Academy, Vice Presidents of the Academy, past Presidents of the Academy, Fellows of the Academy, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, our students, media, and all friends and fellows online, good evening once again. It says, food makes the man, and if it's not food, if it's not safe, it is not food. And I'm sure we're going to have an interesting thoughts on food and public health. My singular role is to introduce the speaker for tonight's lecture. Now, Amos La is a professor of public health nutrition at the University of Ghana School of Public Health, Accra, Ghana. Educated at Tamale Secondary School, Tamale, the University of Ghana, Legon, and the University of Minnesota, Minneapolis, he holds a BSc degree in nutrition and biochemistry, an MPH and PhD degrees in public health, as well as an MA in bioethics. He has also successfully completed the African Nutrition Leadership Training from Northwest University in South Africa and the Executive Leadership Development Program from Harvard Business School in the USA. He spent the decade spanning 2005 to 2015 exploring how the socio-cultural, socio-ethical, and medico-ethical dimensions of public health could be leveraged to promote the health of women living with HIV. Currently, his research and professional practice straddle 2 distinct yet related areas of public health and bioethics and public health nutrition. Overall, his work examines how social forces, commercial forces, and structural violence influence realization of health. He is an active researcher, having served as a lead or collaborating researcher of over 25 successful research projects with a total grant value of over $20 million US. Some of his recent research projects include the IDRC-funded Meals for NCDs project, for which he is the PI, and this provides measurements and evaluation, accountability, and leadership support for NCDs. This is non-communicable diseases prevention in Ghana. Then there's the IDRC Rockefeller Foundation-funded Healthier Diets for Healthy Lives project, for which he is a PI. And this supports the Ghana Ministry of Health to develop a nutrient profiling model to facilitate the implementation of a bundle of double-duty food-based policies. The other is the Advocating for Ghana Health Project, of which he is PI, which aims to create a favorable environment and stakeholder buy-in for a sugar-sweetened beverage tax in Ghana. And the last, but not the least, is the European Commission-funded Afri-Food Links project, which is a co-PI. And this aims to transform urban food environments through effective linkages among 35 partners across 65 cities in the African and European continents. Prof. La is the PI of the NIH-funded New York University of Ghana Research Integrity Training Program, which is running from 2018 to 2028. This has facilitated the establishment of the first ever MSc program in bioethics in Ghana at the University of Ghana. He has published over 100 peer-reviewed papers in very reputable journals, including The Lancet, Health and Place, PLOS ONE, Advances in Nutrition, Public Health Nutrition, and Food Policy. Prof. La avails his expertise to state and not state actors, including civil society organizations and the United Nations agencies. He advises government of Ghana on various public health nutrition issues, including food systems and transformation, and development of food-based double-duty policies. In 2011, he was a participant in the UN General Assembly meeting in New York, USA. He has served as an expert reviewer of WHO guidelines, including guidelines on carbohydrate intakes for adults and children, saturated fatty acids and trans fatty acid intake for adults and children, non-sugar sweetener use, food-based dietary guidelines, and low-sodium salt substitute. He has served on reputable national and international committees, including his recent curatorial role in Ghana's Food Systems Transformation Dialogues. Prof. La is a member of the Food Systems Countdown Initiative, an effort that is monitoring global food systems transformation. In 2019, he was recognized in The Lancet, the diabetes endocrinology component, for his efforts at combating diet-related non-communicable diseases in Ghana. Recently, he led a coalition of civil society organizations and academics to mount a successful advocacy intervention in support of Ghana's sugar-sweetened beverage taxation. He served as the president of the African Nutrition Society from 2016 to 2020, and he is a fellow of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences. Professor La is married to Dr. Matilda La, and is blessed with 4 children, Amos Ethan, Hans Lyle, Elia Zoe, and Eva Chloe. Prof. La will speak to us on the topic food and public health. Speaker, your audience, audience, your speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. If you can give me a few seconds to set up. Thank you once again, Madam Chair. Presidents of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, and herein after the Academy. Past presidents of the Academy, vice presidents of the Academy, fellows of the Academy, esteemed invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I deem it a great honor to have the opportunity to deliver this lecture, the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences Annual Lecture in the Sciences, the 2023 edition. When I had conversations with colleagues and friends about the lecture, I wondered whether to prepare and present a lecture on my work that I have done with others, academic and extension, or to go the difficult route of presenting a bigger picture. In the end, I decided to do both. And so what you are about to hear from me is based on what I have heard, what I have seen, what I have read, but also what I have done. That goes without saying that there would be theory in what you are going to hear. But there would also be practice, and in some instances, a mix of both. I would share with you the theory of our practice, as well as the practice of the theories that govern our field, the field of public health nutrition. As far as today's lecture is concerned, I do not have any conflict of interest to disclose. However, I would wish to disclose that I'm the principal investigator of a number of food environment promoting projects as introduced by the chair, and the ideologies of this project to some extent would influence the content you are about to hear today. Specifically on conflict of interest, I declare that in the past 5 years, I have not been employed or received research support or other funding from, or had other professional relationship with an entity that is directly involved in the production, in the manufacture, in the distribution, or sale of tobacco, or tobacco product, or ultra-processed food. This is important to me and our practice. With respect to the scope of the lecture I'm going to give, this talk was initially titled just one word, food, but later it was expanded to the rather lengthy title that you see in the brochure. And so what the talk is going to do, I would attempt to tackle some of the most basic yet challenging questions about food. It is organized into many parts. In part one, I would explore food from multiple perspectives: historical, political, but of course, public health perspective. The lecture would examine some of the ethical and philosophical dimensions of food, analyzing what food is. Sometimes we refer to it as food metaphysics. Analyzing how humans experience food. We sometimes refer to this as food epistemology. Or how we ought to produce food, how we ought to produce it, how we ought to make it, and how we ought to consume it. And these have everything to do with food ethics. I would examine the political philosophy of food as well, and this is important. So looking at how governments should regulate food. As far as I know, 10 of the top leading experts on these matters that I have had an opportunity to read their work includes a philosopher, David Kaplan, a philosopher from a North American university. Some of the ethical perspectives that I'm going to be sharing with you drive motivations from his work, the philosophy of food. The 6 of the others promised me they were going to be joining, but online. And believe me when I say this, that 3 of these 10 I'm talking about are actually seated here. These top leading aspects are seated here in this auditorium this evening. They would be acknowledged in due course. In part 2 of my talk, I would give an overview of food ethics, juxtaposing food ethics of the ancient and food ethics of today. I would then move to part 3, where I would turn attention to the science of nutrition, outlining some of the links between food and public health, and the tensions therein. I would reaffirm, as the chair indicated, the oft-cited proclamation, and I believe it was first proclaimed by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, that if food, what we call food, is deemed not to be safe, then it is not food. In today's lecture, I would go further and argue that even if it is deemed safe but is not healthy, I would not consider it as food also. In part 4, I would explore how Ghana, as a country, has responded to some of her food and nutrition challenges, focusing on policy. And then part 5, I would share how our context, relevant, and evidence-informed advocacy, we believe has valorized an increased demand for healthy food policy in Ghana. And then in part 6, which would have my final words, and then I'll move to part 7, where I would thank you, and I hope by then you would still be here and awake. So let's move to part 1. It is late, and I don't have a lot of time. If I had an uninhibited degrees of freedom with respect to how long I can stay on this podium, I would have told you a number of stories, about 3 of them. But given that I do not have a lot of time, I would just give you excerpts from one of those stories. It involves 2 men whose names I'm not disclosing for now. I believe you would all know at the end of this excerpt, who were involved in an act of ranking, an act of arrangement, prioritizing. They were prioritizing goods. One of them noted that goods could be arranged into 3. The first category of goods comprises goods which are desirable for the sake of themselves and not for any other rewards or consequences arising from the possession of those goods, category 1. Category 2 comprises goods which are desirable for their own sake and for the sake of their results. Sometimes people say this good includes knowledge, sight, and health. And the third comprises goods which are desirable for the sake of their consequences, but are undesirable in themselves. Philosophers sometimes say it includes various ways of making money. The talk is about food, but we'll be talking about making money as well. So back to the elemental question, the basis of today's talk, the question of goods and food. For those who do not know which categories from these 3 categories to place food, I hope at the end of the talk you would correctly place food where it is supposed to be. Before I delve further into my talk, I wanted to have a short conversation with you about what food really is. But I think it's unnecessary because we know food, don't we? We all know food. We produce it, we sell it, and we eat it, eaten even daily. Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, the answers to the questions concerning food or its nature, I would argue, are not all obvious. And so I'm going to attempt to elaborate. When we talk about food, we talk about food in terms of safe food, fast food, junk food, unhealthy food, ultra-processed food. We also talk about food in terms of its healthiness, and so less healthy food, healthy food, or even healthier food. Some others have noted that we can perceive food as something that might taste good, something that might spoil unless it is refrigerated, something that might make us sick, as I already noted. If what you consider food would make you sick, then it is not food. And so what is food? Food is vexing, indeed. is a vexing construct. It belongs to economics, it belongs to ecology, it belongs to culture simultaneously. You can see food as vegetables, chemists are involved, wholesalers are involved, livestock are involved, fertilizers are involved, farmers are involved, public health nutritionists are involved. As you can tell, and those of you who are familiar with this content or space, I'm skirting around that topic of what food is, because it's a difficult question. Perhaps examining the different conceptions of food might be helpful here. And we are told there are more than 10 different conceptions of food. We could see food as nature, food as nutrition, food as fuel, food as medicine, food as commodity. In my view, one of the problematic conceptualization of food as commodity. As nutrition, food could be seen as a substance or a material that is made up of naturally occurring substances metabolized by an organism to sustain, to grow, and to repair vital processes. The primary function of food in this way would be to provide nourishment, and that nourishment could come from nutrients, proteins, carbohydrates, vitamins, minerals. As nature, food is produced by nature. Producers such as plants rely on sunlight for energy. They draw nutrients from soil or water and then use it to produce food. We don't have primary consumers who consume the producers. We do have secondary consumers who consume primary consumers, and we have tertiary consumers who consume secondary consumers. And that is food. But food also has social meaning and significance beyond its nutritive function. Each society determines what food is. It determines what is permissible to eat and how and when particular things are consumed. There are good foods, there are also bad foods. There are appropriate foods and there are inappropriate food. There are ritualistic food and there are symbolic food, and so on and so forth. On spirituality, food is central to religious traditions throughout the world. Religions sometimes typically prescribe which food should be eaten and which should not be. I will explore this further when I talk about food ethics. One biochemical conception of food is food as energy source. So like fuel, the fuel that fuels our cars. We get energy from the calories that we get locked in protein, carbohydrates, and fat. But food, which is a popular conception, is that food can be medicine, which is, as I noted, another popular conception. People eat specific food for weight loss, for diabetes control, and for a host of other health reasons. We need to note, however, that there are very significant differences between food and medicine. Lastly, and the most problematic conception, as I noted, food as commodity. Food can be an economic object, something primarily for food industry, for investors, for traders to buy and sell. And I repeat that, in my view, this is the most problematic conceptualization of food. It is this commoditization of food that has led to some of the food challenges of today. And so I would argue that food as a commodity shouldn't be a concept that we should promote. I would move to part 2 of the talk. Food ethics. I'll talk a bit about food ethics. As indicated earlier, the conversations about what we ought to produce, what we ought to make, and what we ought to consume with respect to food are food ethics conversation. But food ethics is also about animal welfare, saving the planet, healthy eating, fair trade, and so on and so forth. Professor Ziwot, a Dutch academic, once noted that the moral concerns we have about food here is as old as morality itself. I would like to draw on Ziwot's work to share with you food ethics issues of the past and then today. Other than going through that history from ancient, Greek philosophers through what we have in the Bibles, and then to the food ethics of today, I would just quote one text from the Bible and then move on to talk about the most important thing, which is the food ethics of today. In the Bible, when one moved from the Greek philosophy of food, where dietitians focus their attention on right measures and temperance, you would see a shift from that to where we have legislations in the Bible. And here, these are divine legislations, where the law says, eat this and not that, without any scientific basis. If we move from the Hebrew Bible to the New Testament, we see Jesus and his followers talk about food as well. Jesus, for example, talked about the fact that it is not just about what you eat, it's not what goes through the mouth, but what comes out of you. If you look at the work of St. Paul, he writes in his letter to the Corinth that nothing is unclean in itself, and that meat that is sacrificed by idols and subsequently sold can be eaten by Christians. So he's saying here that it really doesn't matter. And I would leave it at that and move on, as I noted, to the food ethics of today. The new element of food ethics in the modern society is the scientific point of view. Modern science, basically, as we understand it, consists of a combination of systematic observations and quantification. As students of nutrition, we were once told the story of Sanctirus, who we were told spent no less than 30 years of his life on a scale, of course, not literally, but metaphorically. We're told he spent his time measuring the effects of food intake and other daily habits on body weight. He faithfully registered what happened quantitatively when he was eating, when he was drinking, when he was sleeping, and in some instances we are told even when he was having intercourse. And through this work, he showed that the most significant decrease in body weight occurred during sleep, while sexual intercourse by far was the most weight-consuming activity. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not prescribing any weight loss intervention to any of you this evening. I do not prescribe. I would move on to part 3 of my talk. I would now like to turn my attention to the science of nutrition, and I guess that's what most of you were expecting. I would outline some of the links between food and public health. And so that takes me back to that elemental question. What should humans eat? When asked this question today, I would not invoke a Greek philosopher or my Bible, although I'm a Christian. Presently, we live in a universe that is governed by rational laws. And so, Madam Chair, it is the science of nutrition that I would invoke to answer a question like, what should humans eat? Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, nutrition is a science. It is not cookery. It is an interdisciplinary field that focuses on the role of food and nutrient in health and disease across the life course. It makes use of proven and accepted principles of biology, of chemistry, even of social sciences. And so in this era, we do not, and that is my view, have to rely on ancient laws or divine legislation to determine what is food, or what is healthy food, or what is safe food. We have learned a lot since Max Rubner discovered that 1 gram of carbohydrates or protein, once combusted, would give 4.1 calories. Today, a direct mathematical relationship could be established between food intake in terms of calories and body weight in terms of kilograms. We have also learned a lot since the discovery of vitamins, rather recently in the 20th century. But we have learned a lot also since Barry Popkin, and as I told you, we are honored to have Barry Popkin in this auditorium today. Since Barry Popkin called the world attention to what he coined the nutrition transition. We have learned a lot since 2010, when Carlos Alberto Montero proposed and launched the NOVA classification of food, proposing that it is the purpose and degree of processing and not only the nutritional content of food which explain the relationship between diet, quality, nutrition, and human health. Today, we are able to analyze food, as I noted earlier, in terms of nutrients, macronutrient, micronutrient, minerals, and vitamins. And so we have some good answers to this question of what humans should eat. The Eat Lancet Commission on healthy diet from sustainable systems. And once again, we do have one of the world leading scientists who contributed to this report. Professor Analate is the co-author of this report. They released their recommendations in 2019. These provide a comprehensive set of recommendations for a healthy and sustainable diet. There are recommendations relating to planetary health, recommendations relating to how we can limit intake of animal products, recommendations on how we can increase intake of fruit and vegetables, recommendations on how we can limit sugar and starch intake, but also, most importantly, recommendation on nutrition education and policy change. Recommendations such as these are guided by the science of nutrition. And some of these recommendations have been made accessible, sometimes not by nutrition scientists, but by other professionals, including journalists. And one of the people that I believe has contributed to making accessible, when I say accessible, not only just physical access, but epistemic access here, is Michael Pollan from the US. In his New York article titled Unhappy Meals, an article that was published in 2007, I was then a graduate student. Michael Pollan answered the question of what humans should eat. And you know his answer? It was a simple one. He said humans should eat food. What should humans eat? Humans should eat food. He noted, and I quote, "Eat food, not too much, mostly of plant origin." And by food, Michael Pollan did not mean those creations from industrial complex. He meant real food. And real food, he says, don't have long list of ingredients. Those food are not advertised on our TVs. It doesn't contain stuff like maltodextrin. Some of them I even struggle to pronounce, sodium tripolyphosphate. So those things are not real food, he says. Real food is what your grandmother would recognize as food. And for my son, his great-great-grandmother would recognize as food. Those are real food. I haven't mentioned this food by name, but I'm going there now. Ultra-processed food. And ultra-processed food are not food. If they are food, they are not real food. In case you are not familiar with this space and you are wondering what ultra-processed foods are, according to the NOVA classification, as I noted, led by Carlos Alberto Montero, ultra-processed food are food and beverage products that undergo extensive processing and contain large amount of added ingredients, number and amount, including preservatives, flavorings, sweeteners, emulsifiers, colorings, and other synthetic products. And we know today these make us sick. These are designed and are marketed in a way that makes us overconsume them. If you ask me this evening how, what is the mechanism, I would just refer you to David Kessler. He has all the answers as far as these mechanisms are concerned. David Kessler is a former commissioner of FDA in the US, and he authored a book wherein he explores the phenomenon of conditioned overeating, which refers to the compulsive consumption of hyperpalatable food driven by a combination of sensory, cognitive, and emotional cues. Kessler knows that food industry deliberately designed many processed food to be highly rewarding through the process of what he referred to as loading and layering of fats, sugars, and salt in very precise ratios. And these hyperpalatable foods can trigger processes in our brains that encourage us to eat, and we eat, and we eat, and we eat, and we get sick. That should not be encouraged. Now, I would like to share with you some evidence on the impact of these ultra-processed food on our health. I told you food, especially if it is unhealthy, impact public health negatively. So one, a recent survey, very recent, this 2023, a recent survey involving nearly 300,000 participants across 70 countries shows a steep decrease in mental well-being with more frequent consumption of ultra-processed food. So those who consume it, the more their mental well-being is affected. The authors worry that ultra-processed food may be mediating a widespread physiologic dysregulation of mental processes. There are so many studies, I picked a few of them randomly. This other study, a nationally representative study in the US, confirms an association of ultra-processed food intake with non-alcoholic fat liver disease in adults, not only in adults, but also, worryingly, in adolescents. Yet another study, a cohort study also in the US, involving over 31,000 middle-aged women. They were followed since 2003 to 2017. And this work showed that high intake of ultra-processed food increases depression by a whopping 50%. One of the recent studies that was able to show prospectively the association between ultra-processed food consumption and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease was published just a few months ago. Ultra-processed food are harmful, and yet we are told they are food. There's more evidence. There was a meta-analysis that was conducted on 5 high-quality cohort studies. If you look at the attribute of this work, over 1 million participants. Meta-analysis is a technique, a methodology that combines several other studies you put together. So we are pooling the study samples from these multiple studies. So 1 million participants, and if you look at the amount of time that they were followed, we sometimes refer to it as person years. So 13 million person years of follow-up. And this work showed that consumption of ultra-processed food increases risks of chronic disease by, again, a whopping 71%. That should worry all of us. But not only that, children are exposed to, Professor Barry Popkin, who is here this evening, and his co-author, Liz Dunford, recently showed that the diet of infants, and if you are not worried because adults are doing what they do, it is their problem, we should be worried here. Infant children are also exposed to. And they noted that policymakers need to ensure that these products and companies who produce them are monitored closely. Indeed, if you come back home and you look at our most recent demographic and health survey, I would show you some data that confirms what Barry Popkin and Liz Dunford found. I think one more study on ultra-processed food, and I'll move on. Kevin Hull at the National Institute of Diabetes, Digestive, and Kidney Disease in Bethesda, USA, conducted an inpatient randomized trial of ad libitum food intake. And so they designed this in such a way that they got 40 healthy adults with stable weight, one arm exposed to ultra-processed food, another good food. And those who were in the ultra-processed food arm ate and ate and ate and gained weight and gained weight and gained weight. And so they were worried, they and others were worried that ultra-processed food through some mechanisms may even be, delaying satiety, and as a result of that is leading to the increase in the consumption and the weight gain. I've already talked to you about how Kessler has established how we overconsume, ultra-processed food. If you are not worried about this, maybe you are not a health promoter. But even more worrying is the notion or belief, probably yet to be confirmed, that ultra-processed food may disrupt the hormones that regulate hunger. There are two important hormones. There are two important hormones here, leptin and ghrelin. Leptin sometimes is referred to as appetite suppressant. And so when leptin levels are high in your body, then it suppresses appetite, right? And then for ghrelin, an appetite stimulant. And so when the levels are high, that means your appetite will be high and you will consume. So when ghrelin levels are high, we feel hungry and then we consume. After eating, the levels are supposed to come down so that we don't eat. We are satisfied and we stop eating. The opposite holds for leptin. Some are worried that ultra-processed food may actually be interfering with this rhythm. Although not proven, and we don't have to wait for conclusive evidence for this to be proven before we take action. So although not proven, we need to act. I would invoke Altman and Bland here, who have said for years now, and I paraphrase, that if there's no absence of conclusive evidence to show that A causes B, it is not the same as there's existence of evidence that A doesn't cause B. So we shouldn't wait till we have conclusive evidence before we act. And I think the World Health Organization also endorses this precautionary principle. And so it is on this basis that we have been arguing that, of course, first of all, we agree with FAO's proclamation that if food is not safe, then don't call it food. But as I've noted, we want to go further and even argue that if food is deemed safe, based on maybe traditional definition or conceptualization of food, is deemed safe, but it is not healthy, then that should also not be food. And so to understand this, we embarked on a project. This is led by one of my early career researchers, Silva, who is at the back here. We are doing a review, a systematic review, to fully appreciate the current definitional perspective of food safety, its dimensions and its concept. And probably we may have to argue that that dimension needs to change. I mean the definitional perspective. If you have processed food on our shelves, that may not be deemed, it is deemed safe if you look at the traditional definition of safety, but it is not healthy. Is it really safe? So that's what we are working on. Of course, there are gray areas, right, in this, and therefore we need guidance, but we also need guidelines. When we talk about guidelines in this space, and I understand there are industry actors, they may be listening to us or are here, what they usually would say is, why don't you just leave us alone? We can have our guidelines and then we can self-regulate. We do have evidence, and this is some of the evidence that I can say we do have conclusive evidence that self-regulation does not work. I don't know whether it is Hamilton or James Madison who noted that if men were angels, if men were angels, there will be no need for a government. We are not. And so we need government to regulate what we do. So anyone who hears about self-regulation, take it with a huge dose, a pinch of, not a pinch of salt, a huge dose of salt. On policies, I would want to recognize WHO's effort in this. They've been leading the way, issuing and revising guidelines as needed. I have had an opportunity lately to review four of their food-based food guidelines. And as I noted, they ought to be acknowledged. Well, of course, we need more. Beyond guidelines, or I should say, in addition to guidelines, we also need policies. And policies could be legislations, policies could be regulations. We need food environment policies. And by food environment, there are times when I give talks and when I talk about food environment, people think I'm talking about environmental sanitation. It is a technical concept. When we talk about food environment, we are referring to the space or interface, and that interface or space could be physical space, it could also be figurative or metaphoric space within the food system in which people make decisions about what to eat, where to source it, when to eat it, and then with whom. And for us, we have been arguing that we need those policies, a mix of low agency and high agency food environment policies, those policies that would help inform and empower consumers, policies that would guide and influence consumers, as well as policies that would incentivize consumption of healthy food, and policies that would discourage or restrict consumption of unhealthy food. We need food environment policies that would help change our food deserts, change our food swamps, change our food mirages into what we want, which is food oases or food havens. Those are the kinds of policies that we are advocating for. And so now I move to part 4. I move to part 4 of the talk. In this section, I would explore whether or how Ghana as a country has responded to her food and nutrition challenges, hopefully using some of these policies I'm talking about. To answer this question, I would first give a snapshot of Ghana's food-based policy. And when I talk about Ghana, I'm talking about Ghana before independence and Ghana after independence. Of course, there are so many ways or so many right ways of doing this. What I decided to do is to look at it from two perspectives or two lenses, historical but also extant. What I did was, of course, one of the things that I'm talking to you based on what I have heard, based on what I have read, based on what, not based on what I've done. And so I did a literature search. I don't know if Amos Apreku is here, one of our early career researchers who supported me with the literature search to delve into this subject. And of course, I found a lot, but I conveniently chose a number of resources for this session. What you see here, I drove motivation from Raymond Michael's The Food Question in Ghana, published in 1989. Then Beckingham's 2003 Food Labeling Law in Ghana. Adum Bestigati's 2010 Nutrition Policy and Programs in Ghana, looking at it from 1957 to 2008. Brandy Miller's Food and Nationalism in Ghana. This is her PhD work, a Nigerian-American who later turned it into a book published in 2018. But also Jonathan Robbins' Food Comes First. He looked at food policy development and implementation from 1900 to 1950. But of course, I also refer to some of our work, which were published after Adams Gati's work, looking at implementation of healthy food environment policies to prevent NCDs in Ghana. Some of you may be interested in these if you have not already read them. I would just warn the young ones that there are a number of contradictions, but also the narrative violence in some of them are palpable. I would begin with the work by Robbins. Robbins examined the origins of food, the origins of colonial era food policy in Ghana, showing how imperial ideas about food and nutrition evolved in response to changing conditions in Ghana. He notes that the colonialists initially thought there was an abundance of food, but would soon get concerns about food shortages, but also rising food prices. When I read about rising food prices, I said, this problem has been around for centuries. But he tells us they were at a point also got concerned about the taste that some of the elites, even elite, had developed for their food. And when I say their food, I'm talking about the food of the colonialists. And so they were worried about import bills and so on and so forth. What you see here is data from Robbins' work, census data, 1891 census data, 1911 census data, 1921 census data, 1931 census data. These just, elaborate some of the challenges that they faced at that time, and especially food prices. And so what you see here, if you take, for example, plantain. So in 1894, you could get 7 fingers for 3 pence. 1911, you could only get 5 fingers if you had 3 pence. You move to 1921, and now 1 finger, 1 pence. You can see the changes in food prices. So the colonial masters, the rulers at that time, in response to these and other food challenges, had to come out with policies. I can't go into those policies in the interest of time, but I will tell you what Robbins told me through his work, that the long-term impact of the colonial era thinking and policy making could be categorized into twofold. The first is that it created a set of assumptions about what constituted good food and what allegedly was wrong with all of our food. There's an extract from his work that reads, and I quote, "A typical Ghanaian or West African meal consisted of starchy staples like yam, plantain, or maize, cooked and pounded into a doughy mass, eaten with a sauce or soup." And that some complained that it wasn't palatable to them. They also complained it was overloading their digestive tract with nothing but lumps of starch. They argued, in my view, rather prematurely, that the indigent, and that is the Ghanaian, did not eat fruits and vegetables. I felt this is an impossibly narrow view. Vegetables are not just lettuce and cabbage. Vegetables are also okra. Don't we eat okra? We do, and in large quantities. Vegetables are baobab leaves, and we do eat baobab leaves in large quantities. Of course, they did confirm that this argument was premature. Second, Robbins indicated that they laid out a vision, and this is the part, I can see Mrs. Mary Perry here from the National Development Planning Commission. This is the part that should interest, I think, all of us, including them, and they are leading, food-related policy development in the country. So they laid out a vision of a new food system and created tools to build it, including agricultural programs, import substitution strategies, so these are policies also, and domestic education that were focused on those who were preparing the food. The legacy of this colonial food policy continued long after independence. Today we can say the British left Ghana 70 years And yet, white bread remains a very popular food in Ghanaian cities. White bread. I don't think it's Ghanaian food. Is it? It's not. And import of wheat continue to grow. According to the US Department of Agriculture, wheat import in 2019 stood at 999,000 metric tons. And in 2020, it rose to 1,106,000 metric tons. We import food, including food that we're supposed to be producing. The legacy of the colonial food policy can also be felt on our current food policy. And I'm coming home now. Our current food policy. If we take labeling, for example, Madam Chair, before I talk about it, and I probably may not have enough time to do that, but for us to appreciate this, we need to understand the food market in Ghana. And I do to some extent understand this because of the work I do together with the Food and Drugs Authority and others in the country. The food market in Ghana has several layers. I can talk about three. At the most basic level, we have a large proportion of the population producing their own staples or buying and labeled food directly from producers or from street vendors or from small entrepreneurs. Most of these foods usually are not packaged and are also not labeled. A second layer is food markets that consist of value-added products produced within Ghana and which are usually packaged. Some of them are labeled. And the third, we are familiar with these, our supermarket. Most of the food there are imported. They are usually nicely packaged and are also almost all the time labeled. I do not have time to go through an excellent work that Beckingham did. He examined the legislative history of food in Ghana from 1843 to 2003. This work was made possible by IGRC Canada. And I continue to say thank you to IGRC for what you do. Since I do not have time, I would only just mention that if you go through this, and I think you can see the table of content here, you can see for yourself an overemphasis of non-health or non-nutrition matters from these labeling initiatives. You can see emphasis of protection of intellectual property in the market, emphasis on preventing fraud with tokenistic attention given to nutrition or health. And as I said, given that I do not have a lot of time, I'm looking at my clock, I would fast forward and come to the current legislative framework for labeling, including those that were included in the Food and Drugs Act of 1992. Here you would see some health-facing, labeling objectives. One good news, and we should be proud of this as Ghanaians, is the fact that the powers that were vested in the Food and Drugs Act of 1992 have been exercised at least once, probably many times. But the most popular one is the one that resulted in the extensive labeling requirement for infant breastfeeding substitute product. The breastfeeding promotion regulations of 2000 refers. And Professor Analate here, and then my colleague Richmond Ayete, my head of department, he's here, are those who have invested a lot of their research time monitoring compliance of this in Ghana. Finally, on policy, I would want to touch on Gate's 2010 publication. He looked at the trajectory of nutrition policy since independence from 1957 to 2008. And so components of this policy would focus on food demonstration and nutrition education right after independence. At a point in time, policies were heavily focused on weaning supplementary food, but also treating of the malnourished. At a point, we shifted our attention in the 2000s to addressing micronutrient deficiencies, but also exclusive breastfeeding. As I've noted, I did draw on some of the work that we have done, including those that we did, I mean, the policies that were passed after Gatti's work, the Public Health Act, and quite recently, the sugar sweetened beverage taxation. And so the work that we did and published in 2020 and 2023 captured this. Okay, the slide seems to be, okay, thank you. Now we are moving to part 5. I'll be done soon. There are many parts, but I'll run through them quickly. Part 5, I would like to, the previous slide. I would like to talk about our work. And so I've told you what others have done. Our context, relevance, food environment, research, and evidence-informed advocacy that we believe have valorized and increased demand for healthy food policies in Ghana. This includes the sugar sweetened beverage taxation that was recently passed. And so, like as I told you, this is not theory. What I share with you now is not theory. Albert Einstein once said that in theory and practice are the same. I just presented theories to you earlier. We're going to talk about practice now. So in theory and practice are the same, but in practice they are not. What you are about to hear, as I noted, is not based on what I have heard. It is not based on what I have read. It's based on what we have done or I have done with others. To do that, I would briefly give you a 30-second overview of the public health nutrition landscape in Ghana currently. We are in 2023, but Ghana as a country is still battling with multiple burdens of malnutrition. Food insecurity is a problem. Micronutrient malnutrition remains a big problem. And recently, overweight, obesity is also a problem. And over the years, we have generated data. If you take, for example, our demographic and health survey, we've been implementing these since the early 80s, since late 80s, 1988. And data from these local surveys, nationally representative surveys, help us to have a view of the trajectory of this overweight obesity problem. And so what you see here, which looks like a hockey stick, depicts the trajectory of prevalence of overweight and obesity among Ghanaian women. From about 10% in 1993, it skyrocketed to 40% in 2015. There are other problems. If you take the most recent Ghana Demographic and Health Survey, published in 2022, there are other important problems there. I talked to you about Professor Hopkins' work that showed that infants and children are being socialized to ultra-processed food and other, unhealthy food. The 2022 Demographic and Health Survey showed that in Ghana. You can see the percentage of children aged 6 to 23 months. These are months. So infants, 6 to 20, infant, of course, 6 months to 12 month infant, and then children from 12 months to 23, are given sweetened beverages. And when they expanded the definition of unhealthy food in this report to include sentinel and healthy foods, such as foods that have high sugars, salt, and unhealthy fat, we saw 33% of Ghanaian infant and young children being exposed to unhealthy food. And so these and others have given the Ministry of Health over the years a cause for concern. And so they reached out to other stakeholders, including us. Of course, in their part, in 2012, they came out with their first national NCD policy. This was revised in 2022. And so they reached out to stakeholders and called for a concerted effort to address this. And our stakeholders, we were desirous to support this. So we jumped on our feet to support them. But we were soon reminded that long-standing challenges needed to be addressed. So challenges relating to data poverty needed to be addressed, and we attempted to address through our research. Challenges relating to policy gradualism, policy inertia needed to be addressed, and we tried to address this through our advocacy. But also challenges relating to policy, coherence or lack thereof, and we also tried to address that. We do say in Ghana that if just as doing the wrong thing at any given time is wrong, if you try to do the right thing at the wrong time, then it is wrong. So recognizing this, what we had to do was to take a step back and address some of the challenges that I talked to you about. I'm going to walk you in the next few minutes through what we did to address policy inertia, to address data poverty. That work we did helped us to fully appreciate and confirm the fact that Ghana is experiencing a nutrition transition with some evidence of transitioning dietary habit. For those who may not be familiar with Ghanaian food, I talked to you about them. These are some of the things that we use to prepare our meals. Typical Ghanaian meals or food would rely on starchy roots, cassava, yams, local fruits, including mango, plantain, cereals, maize, rice, millet, but also indigenous vegetables. And I'm stressing that. They say Ghanaians don't eat vegetables. We do. We just eat our vegetables. And so we use these to prepare food, as you can see here, like the ampesis, our bankus, our kenkeis, waches, and TZ, and so on and so forth. In terms of food, I picked these two slides from Professor Analate's presentation. One of the slides is this. Thank you, Professor Analate. So indigenous food, as you can see here. So baobab, aki apple, except for mango, right? Most of these, the young ones here, haven't experienced them. And if we do not put in a concerted effort, they never would experience them. But we need them, they are healthy. And it is so because we are transitioning, or we have transitioned from what we should be eating to what we are eating now, with an increased demand for imported ultra-processed food. I've already talked to you about ultra-processed food. They are health harming. And it is as a result of these that today, as I stand here, Indomie can claim to be the king of all foods. Indomie is everywhere, and it claims to be the king of all food. It is also as a result of this, you go out, every corner you are going to see KFC. When I did a presentation in 2016, I counted, I think, 16 or so KFC's joints in the country. Last year, I counted over 30 as a result of this. This is the second slide, Professor Analate, thank you for this. The second, the other problem that we are experiencing currently has to do with sugar-sweetened beverages. And we have argued that if action is not taken, sugar-sweetened beverages would become the next tobacco. And it would seem to me actions have been taken. And so the other aspect of our work, as I'm presenting to you, require that we engage individuals, we engage communities, and we also engage national level stakeholders. Some of these were made possible by projects that I co-led with Professor Michelle Holsworth, the Dietary Transitions in Ghanaian Cities Project, Dietary Transitions in African Cities Project, but also the Meals for NCDs project. And these projects, among others, help us to map the factors in the social but also physical food environment that drive consumption of energy-dense but nutrient-poor food and beverages in the country. And so we generated the evidence, we curated the evidence, we availed the evidence to Ghanaian food stakeholders, including our colleague researchers, policymakers, but also, more importantly, civil society organizations. What you see here are the work that we did. I'm seeing I'm running out of time, and so I would skip this. But you can see we generated a lot of evidence. And of course, that evidence is impacting what I will talk to you in the next 3 minutes. We disseminated the evidence locally, globally, widely. Those of you to the right, oh, it's not too clear, but that is Professor Boyd Simbeng helping me disseminate the Ghana food epi somewhere in Thailand when we had a global public health conference there. Our Meals for NCD study, for example, helped us to generate additional policy influencing and policy impacting evidence. Again, just in the interest of time, I would skip this, but we generated a lot of data, looking at what is promoted on Ghanaian TVs, what is advertised outdoors around where children gather, how healthy are our supermarket. I think I have 2 slides to present the data. So this particular work is important to us. It should be important to all of us. We looked at how healthy our supermarkets were. After a careful auditing and measurement, measuring how much space supermarkets allocate to healthy food compared to unhealthy food, we concluded that for every 1 square meter that is allocated to healthy food, you had 6 square meters allocated to unhealthy food. This work was led by my graduate student, Akosia Eje. This is another study from the Meals for NCD's project, led by another early career researcher, Gideon Amevenya. We wanted to show how advertisement may impact our children in their schools. So advertising of unhealthy food and beverages in our primary schools and our junior high schools. After a careful measurement, assessment, and mapping of these adverts, close to 6,000 adverts, we found about 40% of them were of food. We used different methods, 4 different methods, to tell how healthy those adverts of food were. One of the methods showed that 70% of them, this is the informal's method, were non-core or unhealthy food. Beyond that, you can see from this that not only are unhealthy food being promoted, they are promoted in close proximity to where children gather, our schools. So a red triangle represents an advert of food that is unhealthy. A green triangle represents an advert of food that is healthy. And a black triangle represents an advert of, represent a school. And so you can see not only the red triangles swallowing up the green triangles, they are also in close proximity to schools. This data we showed. And we use this data and others in our sensitization and in our advocacy. We argued, and these days others refer to such construct as predatory marketing, especially when the marketing is targeting children. We argued that if we take our children from home, on TVs, on their way, on the road, in school, they are bombarded with adverts of unhealthy food. And yet, research has shown that you take a 5-year-old child, that 5-year-old child can't tell the difference between an advert and a television show. An 8-year-old child is unlikely to know the reasons behind an advert if it knows that it's an advert. A 10-year-old child may know that adverts sell product, but is not able to judge it. And even 16-year-old can be influenced by digital marketing. They see this as entertainment, right? And so we have argued that if we have to come out with policies to protect our children as far as advertising is concerned, we shouldn't just focus on children, on quote children. 16 years are also children, 17 years are children. And so, as I said, we use this to sensitize. We couldn't do this alone. We engage a number of stakeholders. As you can see here, academics of international repute, locally and internationally, government ministries, departments and agencies, National Development Planning Commission, Ministry of Health, Food and Drug Authority. They were part of the Meal for NCD's advisory committee. UN agencies, WHO, UNICEF, and international aspect as I noted. But also, usually not seen in this space, an MP. We had a lawmaker who is interested in this space, and so he joined us. We are honored to have him here this evening, Honorable Dr. Sandari. In addition to the academic output that I showed you, we also generated policy impacting output, policy briefs. We held consultative meetings. Indeed, one of the things that we did, and I think FDA is presented here, findings from our work was submitted to them. They submitted it to the Honorable Minister for Health, and I'm happy to let you know it has impacted policies in Ghana as I speak to you. But those of us who are engaged in this, the first time we really, appreciated the need for these policies I'm talking about as a nation was on the 30th of September 2021, when we had a consultative meeting led by the Minister of Health. And that was when we had government stakeholders saying that they understand now that policies could be implemented to make unhealthy foods unattractive and unavailable. Okay? So which was good. And so from there, I'm rushing to finish up soon. And from there, we did a lot of things, but that ultimately then led to the birth of the Healthier Diet for Healthy Life project that we are currently implementing. It was launched by the Minister for Health in 2022. The partners of the HD4HL project, University of Ghana, Ministry of Health, these are policies, health sector policies, obviously has to be led by Ministry of Health, National Development Planning Commission, Food and Drugs Authority, but also civil society organizations supporting with the advocacy and sensitization. If we can move to the framework. This is not too clear, but quickly, what we want to do is to develop a nutrient profiling system. And this nutrient profiling system is a tool that is going to help us tell the foods that we have in Ghana, whether they are healthy or not. If they are not healthy, we are going to have some of the food environment policies I already talked to you about implemented using the with the help of the direction of the nutrient profiling model. So labeling policies, we are working on developing a front of pack labeling policy. Public food procurement and service policy is part of the policies we are working on. Food-related fiscal policies, not only just sugar sweetened beverage taxation, but other unhealthy food will be introduced, but we may also have subsidies for healthier food. And then marketing restrictions policies as well. Our hypothesis is that once these policies are developed and are implemented, of course, not only these, there are other policies that are currently being implemented. So once all those policies are being implemented, it would improve our food environment, leading to availability of healthy food. We'll consume them, and ultimately will be healthier. The converse also holds for reducing availability of unhealthy food. And so we have been advocating for some time now that the government of Ghana need to act. And we believe that if government of Ghana implements comprehensive policy measures, I've already talked to you about the fact that we need a mix of low agency but also high agency policy interventions. These policies, once implemented, would make food environment actors take either immediate or strategic actions that would, as I noted earlier, reduce production, importation, processing, retail, marketing, and consumption of this food, and then reducing the availability, accessibility, and then consumption. We are aware that the political, economy of the setting where these policies ought to be developed and implemented need to be taken into consideration. And so we are aware of that. And what we did, knowing the terrain that Ghana is battling with multiple burden of malnutrition, a syndemic of undernutrition, but overweight, obesity as well. We felt that if we have a policy or a number of policies that address these, that would be helpful. Again, there's no way researchers could do this alone. And so we had to work with other actors. That led to the formation of the Advocating for Ghana's Health Coalition, a coalition of academics, a coalition of civil society organizations, with some government actors playing distinct roles. Given that I do not have time, I would refer you to a paper that we have gotten done in the BMJ Global Health. It summarizes what we went through as part of this coalition advocacy intervention. We went through coalition building, contextual analysis, evidence synthesis, strategic planning, development of advocacy strategy, and so on and so forth, as you can see here. So we had to make our advocacy scientific. It was evidence-informed advocacy. What you see here are snapshots from some of the events that we organized. We organized webinars, we organized floats. We identified champions. And I'm happy again to announce to you, one of the champions that we identified is here in this room. Professor Francis Zotto served as the face of this intervention as a champion, an astute academic of international repute. But we also identified public health professionals, a nurse, as an influencer. We identified traditional leaders, and here we have a queen mother, as an influencer. Most of us are familiar with Nana Adjo Awindo when she used to do greetings from abroad. And so they all came to support this. I've already talked about the fact that we had to work with civil society organizations. So the Ghana NCD Alliance, the Ghana Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the Ghana Public Health Association, I hope I'm not forgetting any. I've talked about CAPA and others already. All came together, but we also worked with the Ghana Medical Association. We needed all the stakeholders. And so we had webinars, we had meetings that sensitized Ghanaian medical fraternity as the health harms of sugar-sweetened beverages. We engaged our MPs, and to the left, we went to Parliament with petitions. We went to Minister of Finance with petitions. We engaged Ghana Revenue Authority to the right as part of this civil society advocacy intervention. And in the end, what we got is what we wanted. We got the Excise Duty Amendment Bill passed on the 31st of March 2023, and then His Excellency, the President of the Republic, swiftly signed it into law on the 3rd of April 2023, and again swiftly, but in a staggered manner, they started implementation from 1st May 2023. I have a 1-minute video. I don't know if IT can play it for me.
Will this the Excise Duty Amendment Bill 2022 is read the 3rd time and passed.
An act to amend the Excise Duty Act 2014 Act 878 to increase the excise duty in respect of cigarettes and tobacco products, wine, malt drinks and spirits, and to impose excise duty on sweetened beverages, including fruit juices and on electronic cigarette liquids, electronic cigarettes and electronic smoking devices.
Yeah, thank you. And so I think all of us, the civil society organizations and all the other stakeholders who contributed to these advocacy intervention, not only those who are mentioned here, deserve an applause. And what else is... And so we've gotten the Excise Duty Amendment Act with sugar-sweetened beverage taxation a component. But we've also gotten as a country the first ever food-based dietary guidelines that was launched in 2023. And my colleague, Professor Richmond Aite, who is here, led this effort with our support. We have that. So we have 2 in our bag. There are many more we want in that bag. And as you can see to the right, the HD for HL project hopefully will deliver the front of pack labeling, the marketing restrictions policy, the public food procurement and service policy, but also the food-related fiscal policy. Friends, I have to tell you that this is not an easy job. We are engaged in an initiative that requires that you have to meet very powerful stakeholders. And so if we are unable to address what we refer to as the commercial determinants of health, you see, the initiatives, as I noted earlier, may be there, but they may not come to light. So hopefully, with your support, we would have the courage to continue to pursue what we are pursuing. I would quote Clive Staple Lewis here, who noted, and I quote, that courage is not simply one of the virtues, but it is the form of every virtue at its trying point or moment. These things we do without courage, you can't do them. I'm almost done. I'm coming to thank you. As I told you at the beginning, you are all still awake. I told you I would thank you when I get to this stage. And so my final words. Whilst I haven't run out of words, I definitely have run out of time. I'm looking at my clock here, and apologies, I've gone beyond 1 hour. I leave with you the following. 1, let's leave here with the FAO's mantra that what we consider as food, once it is not safe, is not food. That is 1. 2, as we have argued, and I have argued today also, that even if you think it is safe and it is not healthy, it is not good food. Food, we all understand, must not harm, must not kill. And any food that kills us, either acutely or chronically, should not be considered food. Ultra-processed food should not be considered food. Number 4, let's leave here with the resolve that it is possible to make food policies that address these challenges. Food policies that assure healthier, safer, fairer food environment. And number 5, it is possible for our government to do this. Our government has an opportunity, given what is happening globally, regionally, but also here. Government has an opportunity, but our government also has the responsibility to do this. Government, as a duty bearer, would have to address the needs of all of us as rights holders. I want to thank you, as I promised you, but I would also want to thank those who have made what I presented here possible. You know, there's no way Amos La could be standing here as a public health nutritionist, as a bioethicist, but also at the same time a health economist, or a food scientist, or a sociologist. It's not possible. It is a teamwork. And so I'd like to acknowledge all of the aspects that have been on this, that we have worked together on this project. And these feature the most recent project, Meals for NCDs, the Advocating for Health, and the HD4H Health. But more importantly, our early career researchers, I am confident that the things that we are unable to do, they would do it. And so early career researchers from the National Development Planning Commission, Food and Drugs Authority, Ministry of Health, the civil society organizations are all acknowledged. I would like to clarify that whilst this lecture did not receive sponsorship, the work that we do are funded by a number of initiatives. And so what you see here are the logos of those who have funded our work: IDRC, Rockefeller Foundation, European Commission, the Global Health Advocacy Incubator with funding from the Bloomberg Philanthropies supported the advocacy intervention that I talked to you about. And finally, I also like to thank my family. You know, in spite of all the things that I just talked to you about that I do, this universe would be empty if not for the people that I love, but also those who love me. And I would want to send special thanks to Dr. Matilda Lam, my wife, and our children, Amos Ethan, Hans Leo, Elia Zoe, Eva Chloe. I know they are not around, but I'm sure they have tuned in from across the Atlantic. And finally, this is the proper finally. And finally, you know, the chair of today's lecture is my mentor. And it is also her birthday today. And so, without her permission, I'm dedicating the lecture to you, Prof. Kachi. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And the only thing I think I would need permission from Professor Kachi and Professor Obinga J and the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, is this one. It's already there. I want to take permission from you to announce that if you have questions relating to what Professor Barry Popkins has done his work, don't ask those questions today. Come to the School of Public Health on the 9th of this month. That's next week, right? He is going to give a talk on large-scale regulatory and fiscal policies for creating healthier diet for Ghana, global experience. For the HD4HL stakeholders, is mandatory. You have to come. And all others are invited. And now I say thank you to you all for your attention.
I don't even know what to say. Completely shocked. It's simply a joy when your mentee grows to become your colleague and gives such excellent account of himself, his subject, and his scholarship. There's nothing to do but celebrate him. So I want us all to celebrate the Masla. Please, please, can we? Emma. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. We'll do the unusual at a recent meeting of council. We'll do the unusual meeting and ask about 3 questions, only 3, full-blown questions. So we'll open up for 3 questions, and then Prof. Lau will answer, and then we'll round the whole thing up. He said everything, but 3 burning questions, please. And mention your name and the subject.
Francis Ofosu Kobia. My institution is Bouquet Africa. We do climate change education in schools. The question I have it, in your conclusion, part of conclusion, we need to have a comprehensive policy measures. My question is it possible? And if it's possible, how? Thank you.
Good evening, Professor. Are you by any means saying that the pre-colonial or colonial era policy, food policy, is having any impact on food intake in contemporary times? That's my first question. And the second question has to do with the nutrient profiling system. Are you also telling us that the current act, which was recently assented by the president doesn't really tackle that, please? I'm saying, with regards to the nutrient profiling system, does the current act, does it tackle that or it ignores that?
Okay. My name is Manford Kelvin, and my question is, in case the buying and selling of unhealthy food is successfully minimized, what financial assurance do you have for those who survive on the little income made out of selling the unhealthy food?
Okay, so my name is Anime Aaron. So my question has to do with food insecurity for those in the middle or the lower class, especially how that affects their finances. Thank you. Yeah, so I said my question has to do with food insecurity with the middle income people and how that affects their finances. Okay, so as I said earlier, my question has to do with food insecurity, especially with the middle income or the middle class people.
Okay, so Elku James Offery. My question is, before your implementation 2020 of healthy food environmental policies to prevent nutrition-related diseases, before then, was there any policy to prevent non-communicable nutrition-related diseases?
Yeah, before the most recent policy we are talking about, is that it? These are very, very important questions, especially as they are coming from our young ones. In no particular order, I'll probably should take the easier ones first. So whether or not the Excise Duty Amendment Act that I noted to you passed March 31st, 2023 and signed into law April 10, 2023, whether or not the nutrient profiling model that I talked about was included in it. And the very simple answer to it is no, but I could elaborate a bit. What we are interested in doing now is recognize the relevance of the Excise Duty Amendment Act, implemented. But as we know, policies can be amended. Even one of the policies that we are working on, which to some extent relate to the Excise Duty Amendment Act, on the food-related fiscal policy. This is led by the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Finance. There are conversations to see whether the existing one would be amended or a new fully fledged policy. So the short answer is no. The nutrient profiling model we are working on was not part of that policy. from the same questionnaire, an equity-related question. Here I am advocating for policies that I believe, once implemented, can improve our food environment and ultimately promote our health. We know what health is, multiple dimensions. Those whose daily bread, as he noted, is linked to the sale of unhealthy food. What measures do we have to put in place to ensure that we are not addressing one problem here and creating another? And I think it's an excellent question. It's an excellent question. I think policy making in this space everywhere encounter these challenges. What we are trying to do, we may not be able to, wholly address all the problems, right? But we are trying to ensure that the conversations, the engagement, the contextual analysis that I didn't have time to talk about takes into account all this and ensure that ultimately the policies that we come out with, as I said, are equitable. Maybe these food vendors could, through some form of capacity building and some form of support, could then be encouraged to sell healthier options. And there's evidence in other places where this has happened. So it's a good question because we have to address, we are talking about double duty, right? We want to address the problems sustainably. So that's a good question. We as advocates, but also the policymakers need to be reminded of this to ensure that the policies that we develop are fit for local purpose. So thank you for that question. There was a question on whether or not I believe, and believe is not based on my evidence, but whether or not I believe colonial era policies are impacting our nutrition today. I have already told you those policies, several centuries ago, several decades, years ago, you can see remnants of them in our policies today. The question now is, do I think those policies are impacting, food access and food consumption today? I believe that was the question. To some extent, and given that he's asking about my opinion, not evidence, I would say to some extent, yes. I've already told you about the fact that white bread, 70 years after the British have left, is still a popular food here. We know white bread is not particularly unhealthy, but we consume it. So I'll leave it at that. The first question on whether, I think is a great question. Whether or not it is possible to comprehensively address these problems. You say, how comprehensive can we be, right? Is it possible to have a comprehensive policy that addresses? And it's a very, very important question. My short answer to it would be, maybe it's possible, but I don't know if we can do it, to have a comprehensive policy that addresses all this. We can try, but the problems are manifold. I've talked to you about food as ethics, and even food ethics includes animal welfare, greenhouse gas emissions. Just yesterday we were involved in a WHO meeting where countries were presenting how they have introduced the NDCs, nationally determined contributions on climate change, how they are incorporating that into their policies. We just came out with a food-based dietary guidelines, and when we were doing this, we had a conversation, let's make it and take a food systems approach and address sustainable, food systems issues. We tried to do that. As to whether we paid attention to the nationally determined contribution in this document is another thing. So to say here that it is possible to have in the single policy that addresses all these, I don't think it's possible. I mean, we may not be able to, maybe it's possible, but I don't know whether we are going to be able to do that. But we can try as much as we can to address as many of the problems as we can. And then, before the sugar sweetened beverage taxation, and we are referring to the Excise Duty Amendment Act of 2023. Before that, were there policies that aimed to address nutrition problems, including food consumption, I think, in Ghana? That's how I heard it. And yeah, I think that is an important question. My answer will be yes. As I outlined, some of the policies, even before Ghana gained independence, aimed to do that. From independence till now, there are a number of policies that are addressing. As to what the important part of the question is that as to whether we had policies before the Excise Duty Amendment Bill that focus on consumption of unhealthy food, including sugar-sweetened beverages, is another, which is important. And so we did have a number of policies that existed, but they didn't directly address these problems. You know, I won't use comprehensive, but they didn't address them. Indeed, what we did was, as part of the contextual analysis before the policy came out, was to do what is referred to as legal feasibility analysis. That analysis helped us to know which laws exist, which policies exist. If you're coming out with another policy, would they conflict? Would policies clash? And so we did that work. So again, it's also an important question. Yes, there were some policies addressing different aspects of nutrition. They didn't, comprehensively address the sugar-sweetened beverage consumption in the country.
Okay, I've taken the chair's prerogative, and I think we've had a very thought-provoking session, and so I'll just sum up.
So in attempt to sum up, and clearly that's not quite possible. Professor Imosla has covered everything. In talking about food and public health, I'll just tease out a few seminal points that I picked up. He talked about food ethics, the research, practice, advocacy that they've done, and then a call for action. So clearly, the fact that food and public health are inseparable, he's made that quite clear to us. And the impacts of unhealthy food on human health and planetary health. And clearly show that Africa, currently, the cardinal public health problems that Ghana faces are diet-related NCDs and myths, food insecurity, micronutrients, and malnutrition. And over a third of all adult deaths, most of which are premature, are attributable to diet-related NCDs. So the strokes, the ischemic heart diseases, and diabetes, if untamed, we are in for a terrible death by 2030. And responding to these food and public health challenges, he's explored food in multiple perspectives through historical, political, sociological, philosophical, and public health aspects. He's unpacked current consensus, but also tensions in public health nutrition, including what is considered good food, and he has affirmed that the oft-cited proclamation that if it is not safe, it is not food, and if it's not healthy, it is not food. And finally, I agree with him that he's told us it is possible, and we acknowledge and endorse and congratulate him and his team for all the wonderful work they're doing and the policies and the parliamentary approvals that they've attained, that it is possible to make healthy food policies nudge the food systems to work for people, profits, posterity, and planet. So with this, I want us to congratulate him again for a wonderful session. Thank you.
Right. Distinguished audience, all too soon we've come to the end of a most wonderful session, annual lecture in the sciences for 2023, food and public health. Our illustrious lecturer has taken us through a wonderful lecture. We are all very much awake, even at this hour, and our chair has provided very high-level summary and remarks. As we begin, recognized fellows of the Academy present here, we also recognize individuals who have provided sponsorship and support to this program. As some of the individuals and organizations weren't at the beginning of the lecture, I'll crave your indulgence to quickly acknowledge Honorable Dr. Sebastian Sandare, who has been acknowledged, Professor Kwesi Tope, Professor Anna Laute, Professor Barry Popkin, ministries, agencies, and departments, Ministry of Health, Food and Drugs Authority, Foreign Affairs, NDPC, WHO, UNICEF, Coalition of Actors for Public Health Advocacy, School of Public Health, Ghana Public Health Association, Ghana Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and Ghana Non-Communicable Disease Alliance. We also have here our very distinguished students from Accra Academy, Ghanata Senior High School, and who not only graced this evening's lecture with their presence, but we also the active participation by the questions that they've asked. So our next generation, I think we acknowledge your presence here. All right. I have a couple of announcements. First one is that an upcoming inaugural lecture. The speaker is Professor Mrs. Sarah Dakwa, Fellow of the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences. And the title of her lecture will be Blood Sugar, a social and scientific discourse on its impact on our health. The date for the lecture is Thursday, October 19th, 2023, and the time is 5:30 p.m. here in this auditorium. We've also been alerted to announce that there will be refreshment after the lecture, but before then, I've been alerted to inform us that there were a number of online questions by those who had joined us virtually, but in the interest of time, these questions could not be read. And this lecturer has provided a number of social media address handles, and so he may be contacted so that this wonderful conversation can go on even beyond the end of this lecture. Respect to refreshment, fellows will be served in the fellows' lounge. Our younger colleagues from Ghanata and Accra, we have been alerted to inform you that your refreshments will be packaged and you have them so that you can go back to school in time. And our distinguished audience, your refreshment will be served in the foyer immediately after the program. Thank you very much. I think you've been a very wonderful audience, and our lecturer has also given us a very wonderful lecture. A lecture almost sounds like sound bites. If it's not good food, it is not healthy, or if you don't eat it, then you don't get well. You are what you eat, and similar interesting soundbite from my good friend. Thank you very much. So you are kindly requested, respectfully, that you make stand while the platform participants. Thank you.